Imagine a woman so obsessed with youth and beauty that she believed the blood of virgins would keep her young forever. A queen who bathed in blood, real blood, sacrificing the innocent to preserve her own appearance. Her name, Elizabeth Báthory, a woman whose darkness rivals the blood-soaked legends of history. But her story a myth, it's a horrific truth. Elizabeth Báthory, the real countess who bathed in blood, stands as one of history's most chilling figures. For years, rumors swirled around her castles. Whispers of young girls disappearing, of screams echoing through the night as the countess's obsession grew more and more grotesque. It is believed that over 600 young women met their end at her hands, each sacrificed to the altar of vanity and fear. Tonight, we dive deep into who Elizabeth Báthory truly was. We'll uncover the chilling obsessions that drove her to such extremes, the twisted world she inhabited, and the real horror behind her gruesome acts. We'll explore how a powerful woman, seemingly untouchable in her high status, turned into a monster. We'll reveal how she used blood, not as a symbol of life, but as a tool to cheat death itself, all while leaving a legacy of terror that still haunts history today. The blood-soaked Countess, a name that will forever remain synonymous with dark obsession, murder, and the pursuit of an immortal youth. This is the true story of Elizabeth Báthory. Elizabeth Báthory was born in 1560 in the Kingdom of Hungary, into a family that carried the weight of power and wealth. The Báthory family was aristocratic, deeply intertwined with the political elite of Eastern Europe, boasting a long history of noble lineage and military influence. Her family connections to powerful figures in Hungary and Transylvania would lay the groundwork for a life of privilege and, eventually, cruelty. Her early life reflected the grandeur of her family. Educated, cultured, and strikingly beautiful, Elizabeth quickly became a prominent figure in Hungary's noble elite. She was well versed in the arts, politics, and the intricacies of court life. By the time she reached adolescence, she was already poised to make her mark on the world, admired for both her beauty and intelligence. At the age of 15, Elizabeth married Ferenc Numdasti, a nobleman and soldier, who was a prominent figure in the Hungarian military. Numdasti, often away at war, left Elizabeth in control of the family estates, allowing her to manage them with absolute authority. It was in this setting, with her husband frequently absent, that Elizabeth's dark inclinations began to take shape. The isolation, combined with the unchecked power over her estates, began to sow the seeds for the chilling path she would soon take. Her beauty, intelligence, and familial power gave her unmatched freedom, and with her husband away, Elizabeth could indulge in her desires and begin to cultivate a dark reputation. With the vast wealth of her estates at her disposal and no one to question her actions, Elizabeth Báthory's transformation from a noblewoman to the infamous Blood Countess had begun. Early reports started circulating about her cruelty toward the peasantry who worked on her lands. She reportedly instituted harsh punishments, overseeing the mistreatment of villagers with a cold detachment. Peasants were publicly flogged, beaten, and sometimes even executed for the smallest offenses. Elizabeth, it seemed, was building her own realm of terror, creating a personal law system where she alone was judge, jury, and executioner. The first whispers of her obsession with beauty began to circulate during this time. Elizabeth was known for her striking appearance, but her vanity seemed to be deepening as she aged. She began to surround herself with young women, beautiful, virginal women. The idea of youth and beauty soon became an obsession, possibly spurred on by the wealth and power she inherited. The ability to control both life and death was intoxicating for Elizabeth, and it wasn't long before this power began to extend to her obsession with preserving her own beauty. The first accounts of Elizabeth's delusions began to emerge, suggesting that she believed the blood of young girls could reverse the aging process. It was said that she feared growing old and being replaced, especially in a world that prized beauty and youth in a woman of her position. These early behaviors, though disturbing, seemed to be the beginnings of a deeper, more dangerous obsession, a belief that she could cheat death itself by bathing in the blood of virgins. Her vanity twisted into something darker, fueled by the fear that the power she held over her subjects would fade as she grew older. It was this growing paranoia and the unchecked power over her domain that set the stage for what would become one of the most horrific tales in history. Elizabeth Báthory's descent into madness had begun, and the victims of her greed for eternal beauty would soon pay the ultimate price. As Elizabeth Báthory's obsession with maintaining her beauty grew, so did the horrifying methods she would employ to preserve it. It is said that the bloodbaths began as rumors, whispered in hushed tones by those who worked within her estate. But as the whispers grew louder, it became clear that they weren't just stories, they were chilling truths. Báthory's obsession with blood wasn't just a fixation. It was a desperate belief that virgin blood could reverse the signs of aging, preserve her youth, and maintain her regal beauty. It was reported that Báthory would have her servants lure young girls to her estates with promises of work, education, or rewards. But these innocent girls, often from poor villages, were unaware of the horrific fate that awaited them. Once they arrived, they were trapped in her clutches, caught between her desperate desires and the cold, dark walls of her castles. The women were often killed before they could even understand the full extent of the danger they had entered. It's said that once inside the castle, the victims were tortured, mutilated, and drained of blood, their lives ending in a brutal ritual that Báthory believed would preserve her beauty forever. The methods she used were terrifyingly efficient. Báthory's servants, often loyal but fearful, were reportedly tasked with kidnapping girls from nearby villages and bringing them to her remote castles. These were not random murders. They were meticulous acts designed to feed her growing obsession. The girls were subjected to cruel rituals, their screams muffled by the stone walls of the castles. Their bodies were discarded in secret chambers, left to rot in dark corners of her palatial estates, forgotten and unloved. The psychological toll on these young girls was unimaginable. They were often told that their blood would preserve their beauty for eternity, that they were being honored by Báthory's attention. Some may have believed that their sacrifice would bring them closer to Báthory's power and status. But in truth, it was nothing more than a lie, bait to bring them closer to a horrific death. Most never even had a chance to understand the terror they were about to face. Many in their last moments likely tried to escape. But the walls of Báthory's castles were high, and the guards loyal to her. The women never stood a chance. This cycle of murder, torture, and bloodletting continued for years. The public knew nothing of Báthory's crimes. Her family name and noble status protected her from suspicion. It wasn't until the victims started disappearing at an alarming rate that whispers of her bloodlust became impossible to ignore. Yet by then, the damage had already been done, and the women who had entered her palace, trusting in false promises, were gone, their blood serving only to feed Báthory's insatiable desire for eternal youth. Báthory's belief that her youth could be preserved through the sacrifice of innocent girls was not just a twisted fantasy. It became her grim reality. The very women who were supposed to serve her legacy were swallowed by her greed, disappearing into the blackened corners of history. Elizabeth Báthory's obsession with youth and beauty went far beyond mere vanity. It became a sick, twisted compulsion that consumed her every thought and action. Báthory believed that the blood of young virgins could reverse aging, preserve her beauty, and allow her to maintain the appearance of eternal youth. In her secluded castles, she carried out her ritualistic blood baths, slashing the necks of young girls and allowing the fresh blood to flow freely into the water. It said that she would bathe in this blood, letting the life force of the innocents soak into her skin, in the belief that it would rejuvenate her. But what Báthory did in her chambers was far more than just bathing. She often spent days locked away in isolation, surrounded by the dismal sound of blood being drained, her focus unwavering on this twisted obsession. The walls of her chambers became silent witnesses to the horrific rituals she performed. Her servants, coerced into aiding her, began to whisper among themselves. The more they saw of her behavior, the more they realized how deeply deranged their queen had become. Her obsession was no longer a secret. It was an open, terrifying ritual that had to be concealed behind the closed doors of her estates. As Báthory withdrew further into her madness, the fear in the surrounding villages grew. Whispers of her dark rituals spread like wildfire, tales of young women being lured into her grasp, only to be taken away, never to be seen again. Local villagers began to recognize the signs of Báthory's cruelty, hearing rumors of her luring peasant girls to the castle under the guise of providing work or shelter, only to have them slaughtered in grotesque rituals. The once beautiful girls, promised a future of security, were sacrificed for a queen's vanity. Báthory's desire for eternal youth spiraled into a bloodlust that couldn't be satisfied. Her need for virginal blood, once seen as a fleeting fantasy, became a violent obsession. As her crimes continued unchecked, her personality became increasingly erratic. She began to isolate herself completely, not only from the world, but from even those who might have once supported her. The whispers of her dark acts transformed into fears of a monstrous being, a woman whose insatiable hunger for beauty and power turned her into a monster, both literally and figuratively. Báthory's world of blood and vanity eventually consumed everything she had. She became obsessed with her own reflection, her beauty fading despite the endless blood she bathed in, and she was haunted by the irony of her obsession, a woman so desperate to retain her appearance that she became more and more grotesque with each passing year. The once immaculate Countess, the symbol of beauty and grace, had become a nightmare, a living horror story for the women she had tortured and killed. And as her obsession deepened, so too did the toll on her sanity and her empire. Her quest for youth ultimately left her a broken, feared figure, with nothing left but a body buried in the decaying ruins of the life she had built for herself. A life that revolved around only one thing: the blood of the innocent. Elizabeth Báthory's descent into madness was not just an obsession. It became a full-fledged killing spree that consumed hundreds of innocent lives. Over the course of many years, it is believed that more than 600 girls disappeared from the surrounding villages, their lives cut short in the pursuit of Báthory's twisted idea of eternal youth. Many of these young women were lured to her estates under false pretenses. Some were promised work or shelter. Others were enticed with the notion of rewards, and still more were offered a chance at a better life. But for these unsuspecting girls, the castle was not a place of safety. It was a trap, and once they crossed the threshold, there was no escape. Her primary residence, Countess Castle, stood as a grim backdrop to these horrors. Located in a remote area of Transylvania, the castle became the epicenter of Báthory's sadistic rituals. Within its walls, the once magnificent chambers were filled with the sound of screams, muffled by the thick stone walls, but nonetheless echoing through the corridors of desolate estate. This was where the bloodshed occurred, where the innocent met their end at the hands of a woman who believed that their life force could rejuvenate her body. Eyewitness accounts from servants, guards, and villagers told of a palace soaked in blood. Many who served Báthory, either out of fear or twisted loyalty, witnessed the grisly rituals firsthand. Some servants and guards were reportedly complicit, even participating in the horrific acts, helping Báthory capture and subdue her victims. The eerie silence surrounding the castles was often broken by the sound of screams. Yet no one dared to speak up, as Báthory's status and wealth kept her crimes largely hidden for years. The methodology behind the murders was systematic and sickening. Báthory didn't just kill her victims, she tortured them, often mutilating their bodies before draining them of their blood. The more the girls suffered, the more it seemed to satisfy Báthory's desire. There are reports of young girls being whipped, burned, and sometimes even pierced needles before their blood was harvested. Their suffering, their agony, seemed to please Báthory, fueling her delusion that their pain and death could preserve her youth and beauty. Báthory's growing delusion reached new, terrifying heights. She was convinced that virgin blood, specifically, had magical properties that could make her young again. The more she consumed, the more powerful and youthful she believed she would become. Her fixation on virginity, purity, and blood intensified, and soon her empire of cruelty expanded far beyond Countess castle. Báthory sent out agents to kidnap girls from villages, ensuring a steady supply of victims for her grisly baths. The anatomy of her actions shows the full extent of her madness. Slowly, her desire for youth and power consumed her sanity. Báthory, once a figure of beauty and nobility, became a horrific monster driven by an insatiable thirst for blood. The longer she indulged in her rituals, the more isolated and deranged she became. Her appearance deteriorated, her hair fell out, her skin became pockmarked and decayed. And yet, she refused to acknowledge the truth. The blood of these innocent girls wasn't making her younger. Instead, it was draining her humanity, turning her into a nightmarish figure that haunted the corridors of her castle. As the number of victims grew, Báthory's crimes continued unchecked. The whispers of her brutality spread across Hungary and Transylvania, but her high status protected her for a time. It wasn't until the death toll mounted, and the gruesome details of her actions came to light, that the true extent of her madness was revealed. The bloodbaths, the torture, the murder. All of it had been driven by a woman who had once been a figure of power, but was now consumed by her own terrifying obsession with immortality. As Elizabeth Báthory's crimes grew more notorious, a deep and consuming paranoia began to take root in her psyche. The whispers of her brutal acts, the rumors of her blood-soaked rituals, and the growing number of missing girls were impossible to ignore. But instead of confronting the truth, Báthory turned inward, becoming more secretive and isolated. At first, she had been an admired noblewoman, surrounded by servants and loyal attendants. But as her obsession with beauty spiraled into madness, she became increasingly distrustful of everyone around her. Paranoia took hold. Báthory feared betrayal, not only from her enemies, but from those closest to her. The very servants who helped her commit these horrific acts became potential traitors in her mind. She began to see conspiracies everywhere, believing that those who once served her now wished to expose her dark secrets. Báthory's control over her servants grew tyrannical. She forced them into absolute loyalty, demanding complete obedience and silence. Servants who tried to speak out about the atrocities were either manipulated into silence or punished violently. Some were killed for even suggesting anything that could tarnish her name, while others were bribed or coerced into assisting with her increasingly deranged rituals. The psychological toll on her servants and attendants was immense. They were constantly under her watchful eye, knowing that even the slightest misstep could lead to their own demise. The once majestic palace became a fortress of fear, with every corner filled with whispers, manipulation, and the constant threat of violence. Báthory's once charismatic personality was now eclipsed by the terrifying, paranoid figure she had become. She no longer cared about her status or the appearance of nobility. What had begun as a vanity-driven obsession with beauty and power had evolved into something far more dangerous. A consuming madness where the only thing that mattered was maintaining control. avoiding exposure, and feeding her insatiable thirst for blood. Her descent into terror became absolute. As she isolated herself more and more, she lost touch with reality. The palace walls closed in around her, and she retreated further into her own delusions. The fear of aging and losing her beauty had transformed her into a purely monstrous figure. A woman who had once commanded admiration, but was now a creature of fear, violence, and uncontrollable desire. Báthory was no longer a queen. She had become a living nightmare, one driven by a singular, terrifying need to remain young, beautiful, and powerful, no matter the cost. The unraveling of Elizabeth Báthory's empire of terror began with the death of her husband, Ferencz d'Asti, in 1604. With his passing, the noble status that had protected her for so long began to erode. Báthory, once shielded by her marriage and family name, was now increasingly vulnerable. Her once thriving estates fell under the scrutiny of the ruling authorities, who had been reluctant to challenge a woman of her power. But the veil of secrecy was about to lift. The first accusations against her were ignored for years. Whispers of murder, torture, and bloodbaths had circulated for some time. But Báthory's high noble status, combined with her wealth and political connections, had allowed her to avoid any serious investigation. She had been above reproach, shielded by the connections of her family and her title. It wasn't until early 1600s, when word reached the Hungarian king, Matthias II, that an official investigation was launched. King Matthias II, suspicious of the mounting rumors, sent agents to Báthory's castles to investigate. What they uncovered shocked them to their core. Eyewitnesses from her inner circle were brought forward, former servants, guards, and village leaders, all of whom had witnessed the blood-soaked rituals in Báthory's castles. The servants, many of whom had been forced into complicity by fear or coercion, revealed the horrific details of torture, mutilation, and murder. They spoke of young girls lured to the castles, only to be subjected to brutal acts of violence, drained of blood, and sometimes even tortured to death in the name of Báthory's sick obsession. The evidence was undeniable. Bodies of young women were discovered at her castles, their remains bearing the signs of severe torture and mutilation. Some had been drained of blood, others left mutilated beyond recognition. Some were found in secret chambers, hidden from the eyes of the public, while others were simply discarded in the dungeons. The scenes of carnage painted a grotesque picture of ritual sacrifice, with Báthory presiding over it all like a dark queen. The gruesome discovery laid bare the full extent of her crimes. Over 600 victims, many of whom were never seen again by their families. The public outcry was immediate and overwhelming. Once the truth about Báthory's crimes came to light, the entire kingdom was shaken to its core. What had once been whispered in fear became an undeniable truth. Báthory's image as a powerful noblewoman was shattered, replaced by the horrific reality of her sadistic reign. For years, she had been the terror of the region, but now, she was exposed as a monster. Her horrific acts brought into the light. The revelation of Báthory's monstrous acts marked the end of her reign of terror. The investigation led to her arrest, but her noble status meant that she would not face the execution that most of her victims had suffered. Instead, she was placed under house arrest in her own castle, confined to a small room, alone, abandoned by the world she had once ruled. The once beautiful Countess had become a prisoner in her own mind and in her own decaying empire. Her exposure was a moment of reckoning, a moment when the darkest corners of her soul were revealed to the world. Báthory's name, once associated with power and beauty, would forever be linked to murder, cruelty, and the blood of innocent girls. The public shock and outrage rippled through Hungary and beyond, cementing her legacy as one of history's most notorious female murderers. Once Elizabeth Báthory's heinous crimes were exposed, the once powerful Countess was swiftly arrested and brought to the very castle she had once ruled with fear and authority. However, despite the overwhelming evidence against her, witness testimonies, bodies of her victims, and the tortured remnants found in her castle, the noble status that had shielded her for so long ensured that she would not face the same fate as her victims. Rather than facing a public trial or being executed for her atrocities, Báthory was placed under house arrest in her own Zevo, Countess castle. The very walls that had witnessed her reign of terror would now imprison her. She was confined to a single room, a prisoner of both her actions and her own spiraling insanity. Stripped of her title, her servants, and her once gilded lifestyle, she found herself isolated from the outside world, just as her victims had been alone and forsaken. Báthory's final days were marked by the decay of both body and mind. The once beautiful and powerful queen, consumed by vanity and bloodlust, was now nothing more than a frail, broken woman who could barely remember the power she once wielded. Her mental state deteriorated rapidly as she was left to reflect on the horrors she had inflicted upon so many innocent lives. The woman who had bathed in blood, who had sought to preserve her youth through unimaginable cruelty, was now reduced to a shadow of her former self. No longer surrounded by the luxury she had once demanded, Báthory spent her final years in dark isolation. The very castle that had been the scene of so much violence became her prison. She was left alone, haunted by the faces of the hundreds of girls she had murdered, with nothing but time to reflect on the monstrous deeds she had committed. By 1614, after years of confinement, Elizabeth, Báthory's body finally gave in to the ravages of age and neglect. She died in the very castle where her madness had begun, her death marked by the decay of both her body and mind. No ceremony marked her passing, and no one mourned the death of a woman whose actions had shocked the world. She had become nothing more than a footnote in history, a once powerful figure now reduced to a symbol of the absolute destruction that unchecked power and obsession could bring. Báthory's death, however, did little to erase her legacy. She was buried in an unmarked grave, and her story would live on in whispered legends, as a cautionary tale of vanity, cruelty, and the destructive consequences of seeking immortality at any cost. Her name would forever be linked to the blood-stained walls of her castles, and to the innocent girls who had suffered and died at her hands. Elizabeth Báthory's name has become synonymous with the darkest corners of human nature: power, vanity, and cruelty. Her story is one that has transcended time, evolving from whispered rumors to a chilling legend that still haunts the collective memory of history. Known to most as the Bloody Countess, Báthory's legacy is marked not just by the horror of her actions, but by the disturbing obsession that drove her to commit unimaginable atrocities. While her crimes are undeniably rooted in truth, historical myths have often distorted the narrative, adding layers of mysticism and exaggeration to her life. Over the centuries, stories about Báthory's madness and the extent of her sadistic behavior have grown in number, fueled by the macabre allure of her tale. Some accounts even suggest that she was a vampire, or that she drank blood directly. But most of these embellishments fall into the realm of folklore. However, the core of her story, the torture, murder, and ritualistic bloodletting, is rooted in fact, and the horrifying truth is more than enough to cement her legacy as one of the most infamous figures in history. At the heart of Báthory's madness was an all-consuming vanity and a desperate fear of aging. She believed that by bathing in the blood of virgins, she could preserve her youth and remain beautiful forever. This distorted belief, driven by her obsession with beauty and her fear of growing old, spiraled into a horrifying quest for immortality through the suffering of others. Báthory's actions were not simply the result of a lust for power, but the manifestation of a mind consumed by delusion. She was convinced that blood could restore what time had stolen from her, and in her desperation, she turned to murder disregarding the lives she was destroying in her blind pursuit of beauty and eternal youth. The psychological toll that Báthory's own fears took on her cannot be understated. She was not merely a sadistic ruler. She was a woman who had lost touch with reality, consumed by a need to preserve something she couldn't control. Her own mortality. Her once beautiful face became a symbol of the price that vanity and obsession exact, and it said that the more blood she consumed, the more her appearance deteriorated. In her attempts to cheat death, she only brought herself closer to it, her obsession leaving her a shadow of the queen she once was. Despite her death, Elizabeth Báthory's legacy continues to haunt history, inspiring countless legends, films, and books. She remains one of the most notorious figures of the Renaissance era, and her name is still synonymous with cruelty, sadism, and the macabre. In the years since her death, Báthory's crimes have been the subject of fascination for historians, filmmakers, and true crime enthusiasts alike. Her tale has inspired numerous works of fiction, where she has been immortalized as a horror icon, often depicted as a bloodthirsty monster with a taste for human flesh. But beyond the films and the books, the real legacy of Báthory is the warning her life provides. A woman who had it all, wealth, power, and beauty, was consumed by the same forces that should have been her strength. Vanity, fear, and a distorted view of immortality led her down a path of destruction, not just for herself, but for hundreds of innocent victims. She is a stark reminder that even the most powerful figures can fall into the grip of madness, where obsession and cruelty reign supreme. Elizabeth Báthory's name will forever be etched in history as a dark figure. And though the centuries may have tried to bury her story, her legacy of blood, obsession, and murder remains one of the most terrifying chapters of the Renaissance. Elizabeth Báthory's story serves as a chilling reminder of the dark lengths to which vanity and power can push an individual. A woman once admired for her beauty and nobility, she became a monstrous figure, consumed by her desire to remain young and untouchable. Báthory's descent into madness shows how unchecked desire, the desperate pursuit of immortality and youth, can twist a person's mind and morality. Her life was a tragic testament to the costs of immortality, both physical and psychological. In her obsessive need to preserve her beauty, she abandoned her humanity, sacrificing countless innocent lives in the process. Báthory believed she could cheat time, but in the end, she was only consumed by it. The personal destruction she brought upon herself, her physical decay, her paranoia, and her cruelty, was the ultimate consequence of living above the law, believing her title and wealth could protect her from the inevitable. Her story is a cautionary tale. No matter how much power one possesses, no one is immune to the ravages of greed, vanity, and the corrupting force of unchecked desires. Elizabeth Báthory is a reminder that obsession can destroy not only the individual, but everyone around them. Her actions, fueled by a fear of aging and a craving for eternal beauty, led her down a path that ended in madness, murder, and a legacy of terror. As we look back on the horrors of Báthory's reign, we are reminded that history is dark, and within it lie the stories of those who let their desires destroy them, and the innocent lives they touched. We must remember these stories, for they are warnings of the human capacity for cruelty and the consequences of unchecked power. History is dark, and we must remember it.